Mark Levin leaned into the mic, smirking as he mocked Jasmine Crockett's law degree. The crowd chuckled, cameras tightened on his grin. It looked like another easy win for the veteran broadcaster. But Crockett didn't blink. She sat calm, waiting, her hands folded. And when she finally answered, her clapback cut so sharp the laughter died mid-breath. Levin's smirk vanished, and the room went silent. Like and subscribe, and tell me, where are you watching from? The crowd thought Levin owned the room. He was the seasoned broadcaster, the voice that had mocked opponents for decades. But what no one noticed was Crockett, steady, patient, already waiting for her strike. The studio lights burned bright, reflecting off the polished desk where Mark Levin leaned forward with confidence. For years, he had mastered this space. A veteran conservative voice, sharp, biting, quick to laugh at his opponents. His fans knew the routine. Levin delivered barbs, the audience laughed, and the guests fumbled to respond. It was a script he had repeated countless times. This night, he looked certain it would be no different. His eyes narrowed, his lips curled into that familiar smirk, and he gestured toward Jasmine Crockett with a dismissive wave. The crowd leaned in, eager for the punchline. Crockett sat quietly across from him, posture calm, expression unreadable. She didn't flinch when Levin's jokes landed. She didn't rush to defend herself. Instead, she listened, her silence sharper than any retort. The subject on the table was constitutional law, Crockett's wheelhouse. But Levin wasn't interested in nuance. He jabbed at her degree, questioning her education, mocking the credibility of the school she had attended. His supporters roared with laughter, as though the debate was already over. But while they laughed, Crockett was taking mental notes. Years in courtrooms had taught her how to withstand pressure, how to let opponents burn themselves out before stepping in. To most in the audience, it looked like she was cornered. In reality, she was loading the one response that would flip the entire exchange. The setup was complete. Levin basking in the spotlight, Crockett sitting calm in the shadows. But soon the shadows would belong to him. Levin thought he had her cornered. The laughter was loud, the audience leaning his way. But Crockett's silence wasn't defeat. It was the setup. And her first words flipped the entire room. Levin leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the moment. He jabbed again, voice dripping with sarcasm. Congresswoman Crockett, with that law degree, you really think you can teach me constitutional law? The crowd laughed harder, the rhythm of the show falling into his hands. It was his usual play. Mock the credentials, control the narrative, keep the audience entertained. But Crockett didn't smile. She didn't deflect. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, then leaned forward just enough to reach the microphone. Her voice was low, deliberate, and surgical. Mr. Levin, I didn't just earn my law degree, I practiced it. I've stood in courtrooms, argued cases, defended clients' rights. Can you tell us when you've done the same? The laughter evaporated, the pause stretched. The crowd that had been roaring seconds earlier suddenly fell quiet, unsure how to react. Reporters glanced up from their notes, sensing the shift. Even Levin himself blinked, his trademark smirk faltering. Crockett hadn't shouted. She hadn't matched sarcasm with sarcasm. She had asked a question he couldn't answer, a pivot from theater to reality. And in that moment, the balance of power changed. Levin expected her to shrink under pressure. Instead, Crockett leaned in with receipts, and suddenly the crowd's laughter turned into silence. The pause after Crockett's question was long enough to sting. Levin shifted in his chair, brushing it off with a chuckle. But his rhythm was broken. He tried to deflect. I don't need to be a lawyer to understand the Constitution. It was a line he'd used before, and one that usually drew applause. But this time Crockett didn't let the moment pass. She reached for her notes, her tone crisp, precise, and steady. For the record, I've argued constitutional claims in state and federal court. I've defended civil rights cases, stood before judges, and cross-examined witnesses. That's what a law degree and a law license is for. She let the words hang before adding, so I'll ask again, Mr. Levin, how many cases have you argued before a judge? The room cracked, reporters' pens scratched furiously, audience members shifted in their seats, and the laughter that had once fueled Levin was nowhere to be found. Levin's lips parted, but no clear answer came out. He muttered about being a commentator and educator, but the damage was already done. Crockett hadn't needed to raise her voice. By simply contrasting her lived legal experience with Levin's lack of it, she reframed the entire exchange. What had begun as a joke at her expense now looked like an exposure of his own limits. For the first time that night, it wasn't Levin setting the tempo. It was Crockett, and the room knew it. Levin tried to laugh it off, but the more he talked, the thinner his armor looked. And Crockett, calm, steady, kept slicing through every deflection. Levin's voice rose as he attempted to reclaim control. "You don't have to be a lawyer to understand the Constitution," he repeated, louder this time, his hands cutting through the air. He tried to spin Crockett's point into arrogance, painting her as an elitist who thought only lawyers could speak on the law. His audience, normally quick to laugh along, stayed quiet. The shift in the room was undeniable. Crockett didn't match his energy. She leaned back in her chair, her expression steady, her tone even sharper for its calmness. "Mr. Levin, this isn't about whether people can read the Constitution. It's about who's actually argued its meaning in a courtroom. You've mocked my degree. I've used mine to defend rights. That's the difference." A ripple went through the chamber. Reporters' eyes lit up, pens scratching furiously to capture the quote. Levin's frustration deepened. He spoke faster, throwing out terms, grasping for rhetorical control. But every word carried the weight of defense, not dominance. At one point, he jabbed his finger in Crockett's direction. "Don't lecture me on the law," he snapped. Crockett didn't flinch. She leaned slightly forward, her voice cutting clean through the noise. "I don't have to lecture you, Mr. Levin. Your own answer already did the work." The crowd gasped. Some even laughed, not at Levin's jokes this time, but at the precision of her strike. The moderator called for order, but the room had already slipped away from Levin's control. The exchange was no longer a contest of volume. It was a contest of credibility. And Crockett was winning it with every quiet, surgical line. By now, Levin was louder, faster, scrambling for footing. But Crockett didn't need speed, she needed one line. And when she delivered it, the room froze. Levin pounded the table lightly with his hand, a habit he often used to punctuate his points. His tone grew sharp, almost desperate. "You think just because you have a law degree, that makes you smarter? That makes you the authority here?" The question was meant to be rhetorical, a way to rile the crowd back to his side. But it gave Crockett exactly the opening she had been waiting for. She straightened in her chair, folded her notes, and spoke with deliberate calm. "No, Mr. Levin. A law degree doesn't make me smarter. Practicing law does. Standing before judges does. Defending clients who had no one else does. And until you've done that, mocking my degree doesn't say anything about me. It only says something about you." The words landed like a gavel strike. The chamber, which had been buzzing moments earlier, fell into a heavy silence. Reporters looked up from their notepads, some arching their eyebrows as if to say, "Did she really just say that?" Levin opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. The rhythm, the confidence, the smirk, all gone. He tried to laugh, tried to wave it off, but the laughter never came from the audience. Not this time. Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned forward one last time, her voice crisp, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "Because here's the truth. Degrees don't argue cases. Lawyers do. And that's why I'm not the one who should be embarrassed in this room tonight." Gasps rippled through the audience. A few chuckles broke into applause before the moderator's gavel came down, demanding order, but the line had already cemented itself. The soundbite, the headline, the viral clip. Mark Levin, the seasoned voice who thrived on mockery, had just been silenced by the very credentials he tried to tear down. And Crockett, calm and unshaken, had delivered the moment that no one in the room, or watching at home, would forget. Inside, Crockett had ended the exchange with one devastating line. But outside, that line took on a life of its own, spreading faster than Levin's team could even react. The hearing had barely adjourned when the first clips began circulating. Journalists clipped the exchange directly from the live feed. Levin mocking Crockett's law degree, the crowd laughing, And then, silence as her clapback landed. The clip ended with his stunned expression, a visual as damning as her words. By the time Levin stepped away from the table, the clip was already trending. On Twitter, hashtags carrying Crockett's name shot upward. One user wrote, "Mark Levin mocked her degree, and she buried him with it." Another captioned the video simply, "Degrees don't argue cases." Lawyers do cable networks jumped in almost instantly. CNN played the moment on loop with a chyron reading, "Crockett shuts down Levin in heated exchange." MSNBC invited legal analysts to break down the accuracy of her point, praising her for steering the conversation back to substance. Even Fox News, normally quick to cover for Levin, had to acknowledge the moment, though they framed it as an unfair ambush. Levin's team scrambled. Within an hour, statements circulated from his producers, insisting he had been making a joke and raising a larger point about elitism. But the spin fell flat. The clip wasn't a matter of interpretation. Everyone could see it, hear it, feel the silence that followed her words. Meanwhile, Crockett faced the press outside. Reporters surrounded her, thrusting microphones forward, each hoping to capture another sharp soundbite. One asked if she regretted embarrassing Levin. Crockett didn't smile, didn't gloat. "I don't regret telling the truth," she said plainly. "I've been in too many courtrooms to be intimidated by someone who's never stood before a judge." That single follow-up quote gave journalists another headline. Legal Twitter dissected it. Activists shared it. Even neutral commentators admitted it was rare to see someone take Levin's own tactic, sharp, cutting words, and turn it against him so effectively. What started as a mockery had turned into a national conversation about the difference between commentary and practice, between punditry and the real work of law. And in every version of the story, Levin wasn't the one writing the narrative anymore. Crockett was. Levin's laughter was gone. His comebacks had dried up. And as the hearing closed, Crockett left one last line, not for him, but for everyone watching. The chamber had shifted. What began with Levin in full command ended with him slumped back in his chair, his earlier bravado stripped away. The crowd that had once chuckled at his barbs now sat silent, processing the reversal they had just witnessed. Crockett gathered her papers, moving without rush. Reporters called her name, cameras flashed, but she didn't break her composure. Before stepping away from the mic, she paused. A final beat of silence that made the room lean in one more time. Law isn't a punchline. It's a practice, and mocking the work won't erase the fact that I've done it. And he hasn't. The words cut through the air with quiet finality. No shouting, no theatrics, just a measured truth that landed harder than any outburst. The room stilled. Levin's eyes flicked downward, his smirk nowhere to be found. The contrast was unmistakable. The pundit who thrived on mockery had been silenced by the very credentials he tried to tear down. Outside, the line echoed. Anchors repeated it on loop. Activists posted it with captions like, "Read that again." And commentators admitted, but even those critical of Crockett, that the clapback had been devastating. As the camera pulled back, the scene told its own story. Crockett walking out calm, steady, composed. Levin left staring at his note as the room no longer his. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a reminder of the difference between practicing the law and mocking it for ratings. Would you trust the pundit who ridicules the work or the lawyer who's actually done it? Like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?